Welcome everyone to the game between Magnus Carlsen and Praggnanandhaa in Zagreb. This is the second time they will be playing against each other, reversed colors. In one of the very rare occasions that we see during a tournament, Magnus Carlsen has arrived first to the chessboard. He is currently leading by a 2-point gap over Duda, and if he manages to draw this game or win, he would already be the champion with one round to spare, and which kind of explains why Magnus is here. You can look at him, he looks a bit tired. Of course, it's a long day, 9 rounds of blitz yesterday, now already has played 7 rounds, and he spoke on the interview that after 3 days of rapid he just didn't feel the flow coming into him, but on the first day of blitz he started to kind of get into the groove, and one day of amazing chess, 7.5 out of 9, has been good enough to put him in the lead here. And now this moment where he takes on his teammate recently who got included in Team Liquid, R. Praggnanandhaa, and both of them have an excellent relationship with each other. Magnus really likes Pragg, and Pragg is someone who adores Magnus. So, but on the board you can see Pragg, by the way, coming fresh from a very difficult game that he played against Alireza Firouzja just a few rounds ago, then Duda, then Caruana. Like, Pragg has had a very tough day. He has lost almost all the games, just one draw out of 7 rounds. So he will be trying his best, and this, dear friends, is the ambit recap of the day. Magnus opens the game with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and knight to c3. A clear intention by Magnus that I am going for a very solid opening here. Pragg goes knight to f6, pawn to d4. This is considered as one of the most solid ways to play in the opening. The 4 knights in e4, e5, takes, pawn takes. You can see both players blitzing out their moves. Castles. Pragg goes for the central break with d5, pawn takes. And now there are a few moves here. h3, but bishop g5 also very strong, pinning the knight. Bishop e6, defending the pawn here. And yeah, a very good opening choice by Magnus, because when you need just a draw to become the champion, this opening has very little that can go wrong. It's very simple. You put your rook here, you bring your queen out, you try to trade some pieces, maybe maneuver your knight sometimes. Here he goes knight b5. This is an interesting move. You want to maybe reroute the knight to d4, a3, bishop a5, and now b4 played. So the idea is, if you take cb4, I want to go queen e1 and bishop b6 by Pragg very quickly. He looked sideways just to remember what his prep was here in this line. And now bishop goes back to b6. Observe carefully the emotions of these players. You can see there Magnus somehow not remembering his prep or something. He did emote a bit there. Bishop takes, and queen d2. He brings his queen up, and the knight will most likely later swivel to d4. He goes rook to c8. And maybe now bishop e3. Trading the bishops might be a good idea. But Magnus, of course, worrying a bit about this knight. You know, it right now has very little squares, and going back to c3 might be a recipe for disaster with a pin coming in here. So, not so sure how Magnus is going to take this ahead, but he is definitely feeling not the most comfortable in this position. He didn't expect it to shape up this way after playing this opening. He goes, he wants to play c3, but this turns out to be a small inaccuracy, because now with h6, if you maintain the pin, there's this amazing move knight e4. And now if you take the queen, I take your queen and black is winning. So actually the move h6 is going to pose Magnus a very big question, and there you have Pragg. And look at Magnus suffering, yeah, in this game, because now you have to come back. Okay, if you take on f6, queen f6, this is just incredibly good position for black. Two bishops, everything looks great. So bishop h4 realized doesn't work. And look at that. You know, it's an expression of Magnus where he's saying, I'm just not seeing the moves. Knight e4 played by Pragg. And once again, I think a smart idea is to just come back queen e1, so that if you take, I take. Yes, c3 is weak, but the other point could be to just take on e4, bishop e4. And look at Praggnanandhaa. He has his game face on. He hasn't won a single game today. That's very rare for Pragg. He never really tilts, makes a comeback always. But here's a great way to kind of redeem himself by beating Magnus. You've lost 6 games, but you beat Magnus already. The day is quite better for you as a player. And now Magnus takes on e4. Not a very happy move for him. Pawn takes. And if you take here on d8, black is happy. So Magnus comes back, knight d4. And now bishop jumps into c4, attacking the rook. If Magnus loses this game and Duda wins, then there's only a difference of 1 point between them. Things can get sharp. f5 is something that has to be considered. f5, f4 could be a very good idea here. And I think Praggnanandhaa has 2 extra minutes on the clock. So everything going his way here. He has more time. He has a better position. He goes queen f6. And I think a very nice move, because you want to get your rook in, maybe move the queen to g6, f5, f4. He does play queen to g6. And next up is f5, f4 coming, h3 played by Magnus. And let's see what move Pragg does. I mean, the engines prefer f5. It does 2 things. It threatens f4. It also stops queen g4 in the position. And you don't want to be trading queens right now with black, because you have a very nice attack that's boiling. Maybe with f5 you are a bit worried about knight e2, the knight jumping here. But think about this position. Oof, this is so much better for black. But Pragg goes bishop d3, and Magnus instantly takes the opportunity to trade queens. And Pragg is like, okay, I'm happy to go into this endgame. Bishop b6, because now c3 is weak. Okay, rook c1, defend. You know you can fight, but Pragg will then put even more pressure. You want to defend this pawn, but again, your position is not a very happy sight. And so knight f5, Magnus is trying to trade pieces, maybe go into an opposite colored bishop position. Rook takes c3. Maybe there's a check and knight d5 coming in. That seems like a good plan. Magnus is calculating here, because knight e7, king h8, knight d5. Yeah, he plays it. He gives a check. King h8 or king h7 is the question. Imagine you go king h8, knight d5, rook is attacked, bishop is attacked. If you move the rook kind of equal, let's say take, and now knight c3, bishop d2, attacking here and here, knight e4, attacking the bishop, take on e1, rook e8, trying to pin here, f3, and I think that should be good for equality. He goes king h8, and I think this line, which was just shown right now, is what Magnus can go for. Knight to d5, a very strong move, but Magnus is taking a bit of time. He's not feeling that free-flowing thought, or you can say he's not trusting his instincts in this game. Already he has been put into trouble by trusting them, and he comes knight d5, has 1 minute 32 seconds. Pragg has 3 minutes 14 seconds. For Pragg, 2 moves. Rook c6, defending the bishop. The line that we just saw, rook bishop takes e3, but bishop e3, knight c3, bd2, knight e4. It looks like a draw. Whereas rook c6, maybe he takes on e3. And of course, Magnus must take on c3 now. I think, but Magnus goes rook e3. That's not at all a good move. That's a mistake there by Magnus Carlsen. And now Pragg is just better. He's pawn up. He has a nice bishop here. I don't know, maybe Magnus is banking on some moves like f3 to destabilize this bishop. Already he has the pawn on g4, so f5 is not possible. Rook b3, a good move by Pragg. And the question is, how is Magnus Carlsen going to equalize? He goes knight f4, putting pressure here. rook c8 with the idea of rook c2 or rook c3. Good idea. But also you could go rook d8. The pawn on a3 is weak. So many little things to worry about here. Pragg goes rook d8 with 2 minutes 24 seconds. Magnus down to 1 minute 20 seconds. He plays his pawn to a4, trying to grab some space on the queen side, and Pragg can instantly stop it by playing pawn to a5. He plays it. Pawn to a5 played. And Magnus is kind of running out of ideas, yeah, here. Because Pragg is coming in with his rook. Rook to d4, attacking the pawn on a4. King h2 played. And the king comes up to g3 perhaps. Magnus is activating his king with less than a minute on the clock. Praggnanandhaa now trying to figure out what's the best way to put pressure. Finds the best move. Rook b4 with the idea of bishop c2 perhaps. Rook a3 played. And now can you go bishop c2? I like this move, putting pressure here on a4. But also possible rook d4 to put pressure here. But yeah, maybe he wants to take. Maybe he wants to take on d3. Look at this line. Rook d4 takes. And if you take here, I take and pick up this pawn, forcing you to go defensive here. And this is a winning position for black. He finds it. Rook d4. Pragg plays it. And now this entire line of simplification is not so good for Magnus. It's very cool how Pragg is putting pressure on Magnus. Now king g3 played. In a way, trying to defend this pawn in the endgame. And Pragg wants to get his bishop out from here now. But also this is not a great idea because take, knight d3, and this is drawish. So you want to keep this, keep the juice flowing, keep the tension in the position. Pragg makes a decision to pull out the bishop. Bishop a6. 1 minute 4 seconds for Pragg. 46 seconds for Magnus. Running down the clock. And now hardly any ways to even try for equality. It's all about trying to save yourself here. Can Magnus do it? The greatest endgame player of all time. Takes the pawn on a4. Pragg is now 2 pawns up. He takes the rook. Rook takes. And I think one thing is that this bishop is running out of a few squares here. So maybe going in and attacking it could be an idea. And Magnus, well, he's down to last 20 seconds. In fact, 13 seconds only. Rook c5 played by him. And Pragg can go check. He goes bishop c4. Knight jumps to f5. But where is the knight heading from here? Bishop e6. He comes back to f4. Maybe Pragg can come back to c4. But he goes rook a3 check. He's ready perhaps for a rook endgame. Take on f3, Pragg. That should be good. That should be fine. Or pull your bishop to a2. And then you have nothing to worry about. A clearly winning position with 2 extra pawns. And Pragg has more time there. He's close to 40 extra seconds. Magnus is almost sure that he might not be able to save this position. He goes e3, takes on e6, pawn takes. And now rook e5 played. Attacking this and this. Very important to push the pawn to a4. Now that's very, very key. Because this is the moment where, yes, he finds it. And now, if Magnus were to take rook e6, then rook b3 with the idea of a3 is killing. So f4 played, trying to bring his king. And now very important for Pragg to play king g8. King g8, king f7. King coming into the game is super, super critical. It's the only way to win. But it's so difficult to understand. He goes rook b3, which is also very natural. But king comes in. And now, somehow, Magnus understands. Look at the speed at which he's playing. Suddenly, he's transformed. Rook e7, cutting the king off. And now swinging the rook over to the other side. Yes, Pragg has 2 pawns. But the e-pawn is taken care by the king. And Magnus's body language has absolutely changed. He feels that he can hold this. And the king cannot come out. If it tries to move in, the g7 pawn falls. and then the rook can come back to stop the a pawn. King g8, king f3. Magnus is waiting. King h7. Pragg needs to find a way to make progress, but there is none perhaps. King h8, rook check comes up. King g8, king f3. Very interesting. And now rook c3 is waiting here, but the waiting game cannot help Pragg. He finally gives back the pawn, takes the pawn on g2. You can't take here because of check. You lose the pawn. And Magnus is now just few moves away from winning this tournament. Can he do it? Or can Pragg outwit him here? Rook played to a1, king f2, a2. Now careful, there could be rook h1 ideas. So king g2, good move. And now king f8, Magnus gives a check, king comes up. Rook blocks the king. Now the only idea is to quickly bring your king up. But is that going to help? Are you going to be able to win this pawn? Magnus goes here, rook a7, you can't go king g5. That's the problem because you lose this pawn with a check. So king comes up again. Rook here, king waits. Pragg is trying to create some kind of a zugzwang. And Magnus goes rook check, king e3 perhaps. And waits with a check. Good move there. King f4, rook check, king g5. And now the very important move that he has to attack g7. King moves here. White has many waiting moves, which is the good idea, or maybe just enough waiting moves so that Pragg cannot win the position here with these two pawns. Yes, he could win these two pawns, but will lose g7, and then that's not enough to win. Takes on a2, rook c4. He's come here. Magnus goes rook a6. Very interesting move. If you take here, he has f6. So Pragg goes check, king here, king g3. Rook goes back for a check. And Magnus knows he's got it. Rook a7. There's no way to prevent this. Shaking his head. And guys, Magnus Carlsen has somehow managed to trade everything. King g3 played, h5, king h4, and takes a draw there. Becomes the champion of the tournament. Praggnanandhaa is unhappy there. He had Magnus on the ropes. He was so close to winning that in that rook endgame. It all changed with that one move where he did not find king g8. But what a day for Magnus becoming the champion. Let's analyze that critical moment and see how king g8 could have made. I want to analyze this endgame from the point where Magnus took the bishop, pawn takes, and played his rook to e5. He's putting pressure here, and Pragg passes the first test by pushing the pawn. Taking here would be wrong because after rook b3, you have two ideas. One is to push the pawn. Second, if the rook moves away, you have rook b1, which is an extremely strong move, threatening e2, e1. And there's no way to stop this. Let's say you go rook e6. I already have a3, and these two pawns are extremely strong. So you actually, after rook b3, try to wait here with f4. And now a very nice move, which is rook b8, to put the rook behind the pawn. And if you go after this pawn, then I go after this pawn, and I'm winning here with black. So Magnus realized that taking this pawn is lost, and that he did in a split second. He played f4, and here Pragg had to find king g8, which is a very important move. He went rook b3, and after this Magnus found all the best moves. Actually, you must realize that taking the pawn now again fails to rook b8. We just saw this line. So he found king f3, and then he took the pawn, and then he cut the king and put the rook here when it was a drawn position, and he held on. But how does king g8 change everything? Why is it so strong here? Let's just look. First, Pragg wants to save this pawn, so you must take it, otherwise you are just busted. So rook e6, king f7. And now the rook has a question. Does it go after the a pawn? Does it stay controlled on the e pawn? Let's look at both scenarios. If you stay controlled on the e pawn with rook e5, I give you a check, a very direct line. And after king f2, I play rook a2. And you are in a bit of a mess now what to do here. Because let's imagine that you still keep waiting with rook e4 and you wait here. Then I will actually give a check with the king, takes, rook b2. And now when you go back, I play a2 and queens. So this is winning. So you cannot keep waiting here after this. So instead of that, you go after the a pawn. I play a3. you kind of go here, and now you start advancing your king because there's no time to take this pawn now. Rook g7 is always met with queen, takes, rook b2, a2, rook b1 and queen with a win. So then the black king is completely free here to roam and to come this and to win the game. So this one actually after king f7 staying on the e file is disaster. So you say, okay, I will go here. Now you again find this very nice move, rook a2. And let's say you play king f3. Now I play e2, king f2 and a3. And once again, I've reached this position where I can simply bring my king in. As you will see in the game, we reached a very similar position, but with the rook on b3 and pawn on e3, not this way. This configuration is just so much better. And that's the reason why it wasn't winning now. For example, let's just finish this line. I give a check, king e6. You can't take here because of e1 queen. So you give a check, king here. You try to stop me. I come regardless. And when you even play a move like g3, I can even play this beautiful idea, rook a1. Because after king e2, where I was planning to queen a2, and now this has opened up completely this threat. So even if you go king f2, rook here, and I'm queening, and after takes, check here and wins. Rook endgames are super complicated. Often it's very difficult to understand the difference between moves king g8 and rook b3. And even if you understand, it's very difficult to play it next time in your game. But with every single analysis, you learn something and you improve your intuition of rook endgames.